I grew up thinking that if you love someone enough, you help them even when it stretches you. That belief is the reason I opened my savings and handed it over without stopping to think twice. My brother Lucas has always been the kind of person who talked big but rarely followed through. Still, I never stopped seeing the kid I used to walk to school, the one who clung to me when our dad disappeared for weeks at a time and mom worked every shift she could get. When he came to me with his idea, he didn't sound like the brother who slept until noon or jumped from job to job. He sounded serious, hopeful even. He told me he wanted to start something of his own instead of working dead-end positions. He said he finally had a plan, something that could turn his life around if he had the means to get started. I still remember how tired I was that night after working back-to-back hospital shifts. But when he talked, I listened like it mattered more than rest. He said, "Han, this could be my shot. I just need a boost. Once it takes off, I can stand on my own." Those words got to me in a way I can't explain. I've always felt like half-sister, half-parent to him. Even now, as adults, part of me still thinks it's my job to hold things together. So when I asked how much he needed and he gave me a number that made my stomach clench, I tried to ignore the knot forming in my chest. I told myself I could rebuild the money I'd saved. I told myself I was helping him avoid becoming the kind of man our father was, full of excuses and empty promises. I wanted Lucas to have a chance no one ever gave me. He didn't beg or pressure me. He just sat there with this look in his eyes that reminded me of when he was little and scared. That was all it took. I transferred the money a few days later. I didn't draw up any papers or ask him to sign anything. I didn't ask for a timeline or proof. I trusted that the person I'd raised more than grew up with wouldn't throw that trust away. I didn't even tell anyone about it. Not my co-workers, not my closest friend, not even my daughter. It felt like something I was supposed to do quietly, like an act of faith you don't brag about. I didn't think about what would happen if things went wrong. I only thought about how it would feel to watch him finally stand on his own. I imagined calling him one day and hearing pride in his voice instead of frustration or embarrassment. That hope was stronger than caution. Looking back, the signs were there even then, small pauses, half explanations, moments where something felt off. But when you love someone, you convince yourself that doubt is disrespect. You brush it aside and focus on the version of them you want to believe in. That's what I did. I believed in him more than he believed in himself, and that belief. When Lucas came to me with his idea, my own life was still shaky. I had just finished the long process of divorcing Mark. The papers were signed, the house was gone, and I was living in a modest rental with my daughter, Lily. I worked full-time as a nurse at a hospital in Columbus, Ohio. The job was steady, but the shifts were exhausting, and the bills didn't stop just because I was starting over. Still, even with everything I was dealing with, I felt lighter being on my own again. I told myself that rebuilding was just another kind of work, the kind you do quietly until one day things feel normal again. Lucas knew about the divorce, but he didn't see how much it drained me, emotionally, financially, and physically. Whenever we talked, I tried not to make him feel the weight of it. I never wanted him to think of me as someone who needed help. I've always been the one helping, the one who figures things out. So when he called one evening and asked if he could come by, I didn't suspect anything serious. I thought maybe he needed advice or just wanted to talk. He sat at my kitchen table and said he was tired of bouncing between jobs. He'd done a little bit of everything, warehouse shifts, delivery driving, construction work, but he said none of it felt like a future. He told me he'd been thinking about starting a mobile auto repair service. He said people were always stuck with car trouble and didn't have time or money to tow their vehicles to shops. He made it sound like he'd been planning it for months. He explained how he could travel to customers' homes or workplaces with tools and basic equipment. It sounded reasonable on the surface. He said he knew enough about fixing engines and brakes thanks to his old jobs and friends who worked in garages. He talked like he finally understood that stability had to come from effort, not luck. Then he said he just needed what he called a starter fund. He said it like it was something small, something temporary. He didn't throw out a number right away. He wanted to ease into it, like he knew asking for money wasn't something most people could do comfortably. I listened and tried to focus on his words instead of the slow pulse of anxiety in my chest. He told me he wanted to buy a used van, some equipment, and cover the costs of basic licensing. He promised it wouldn't be wasted. He didn't ask with entitlement in his voice. He asked with the kind of hope that makes you forget to protect yourself. He said he didn't want to end up like our father, drifting, making excuses, blaming everyone else. That line hit me harder than anything. I was still picking up the pieces of my own life, but I didn't say no. I thought maybe helping him could be one good thing during a time when everything else felt uncertain. I didn't tell him how tight things were, or that I was still recovering from lawyer fees and splitting assets. I just nodded and told him I'd think about it. Deep down, I already knew I was going to say yes. became the first mistake in a long list I wasn't ready to face yet. When Lucas finally told me the amount he needed, he said it as if he had already practiced it in his head. $35,000. He broke it down in a way that sounded organized. 10 for a used van, 8 for tools, 5 for permits and insurance, and the rest for branding, uniforms, and advertising. He talked about it calmly, like he wasn't asking for more than I made in almost a year after rent, groceries, and bills. I remember sitting at the table, staring at him while my mind tried to make sense of that number. I didn't react right away. He must have taken my silence as hesitation, because he quickly added that it didn't have to be all at once. He said he could start with part of it and build from it. But even that would have been more than I could just hand over without feeling the impact. That money wasn't just savings. It was a plan. Every paycheck, I set something aside so one day I could stop renting and buy a small house for Lily and me. Nothing fancy, just something that belonged to us. After the divorce, I told myself that at least I still had that account. It was the one thing I had protected and didn't touch even when everything else was falling apart. But when Lucas asked, I didn't tell him any of that. I didn't tell him how long it took to build that fund, how many double shifts and overnight calls were behind it. I didn't remind him that I was starting from scratch, too. I just asked him if he was sure about the numbers. He nodded with this quiet certainty that made it hard to question him. He didn't pressure me. He didn't act like I owed him anything. That almost made it worse. He looked at me with a mix of hope and guilt, and I could tell he hated asking. That made me want to make it easy for him. I told myself it was temporary, that he'd pay me back when things took off. I reminded myself he was family, and family steps in when there's a chance to change someone's path. The weekend after that talk, I went to the bank. I didn't pull the entire amount right then, but I transferred a large portion to his account so he could get started. I told him I'd send the rest when he showed me progress. He agreed without complaint. He thanked me more than once, and he hugged me like he hadn't done since we were teenagers. Driving home after making the transfer, I tried not to think about what I'd just done. I told myself that sacrifices don't feel comfortable in the moment, they pay off later. I imagined him booking his first client, fixing someone's engine in the driveway, building something from nothing. That image helped me ignore the unease that crept in when I logged into my bank account and saw what was missing. I didn't tell Lily. I didn't tell my coworkers. I didn't tell anyone. Saying it out loud might have made me hear how risky it was. Keeping it quiet made it easier to believe I was doing the right thing. I didn't think of it as losing something. I thought of it as shifting it from my future into his. After I transferred the money, Lucas did exactly what someone responsible would do, or at least that's how it looked. He started sending me small updates, just enough to make me feel like things were moving forward. One day, he texted a picture of a set of socket wrenches laid out on a work. Another time, he sent a short video of what looked like an engine hoist in someone's garage. He said he got a good deal on used equipment from a guy who used to work at a dealership. I didn't question it. He also mentioned meetings with people he said were interested in helping or partnering with. Met with a mechanic who might come on later, he wrote once. Another time, he said he had talked to someone about renting a small storage unit for extra parts. Each update sounded believable, nothing too big or flashy. Just enough movement to keep me calm. I didn't ask for proof beyond what he sent. There were no invoices, no receipts with his name on them, but I told myself he was keeping things affordable and trying to stretch every dollar. Every time he texted, I felt a little relief, like maybe I had done the right thing after all. The trust one had didn't come from those messages. It came from our history. When we were kids, I was the one who made sure he ate dinner, finished schoolwork, and got to bed. Our mom worked 2 jobs, day shifts at a clinic and night shifts cleaning offices. She barely had time to sit down, let alone watch over us. Our dad drifted in and out, disappearing whenever responsibility got too close. Sometimes he'd show up with gifts or promises, then vanish again for months. Lucas never knew what version of him would walk through the door. Because of that, I became the one Lucas leaned on. I packed his lunches, showed up at school events when no one else could, and made sure he didn't feel like he was on his own. I was still a kid myself, but I learned early how to carry someone else's weight. That kind of bond doesn't break just because you grow up and move into different houses. It lingers, and it shapes the choices you make later. So when he sent those updates, I didn't study them too closely. I didn't zoom in to see if the tools actually belonged to him or if the space he filmed in was borrowed from a friend. I didn't examine the background of the photos or ask who the mechanics were. I just believed him because I always had. He'd say things like, going to meet a guy about licensing tomorrow, or talking to someone about branding next week. I didn't press for names or dates. I didn't want to make him feel like I was checking up on him. I told myself I was giving him room to grow without treating him like a child. Every time I saw his name pop up on my phone, I braced for bad news. But instead I got another quick update that sounded like progress. I felt proud of him for trying, even if a small part of me still worried. I pushed that worry down because trusting him felt easier than doubting him. I didn't think I needed proof when what I'd always relied on was faith. Just assumed he'd send it back one day, and I'd rebuild from there. As the months went by, the updates from Lucas became thinner and less detailed. In the beginning, he sent pictures and short messages, but slowly those turned into quick texts saying he was working on things or waiting on calls. He always had a reason something was delayed. Licenses took time, people were slow to respond, equipment needed repairs. None of it sounded impossible, but after a while, I realized I didn't really know what progress had actually been made. I didn't want to doubt him, but I also couldn't ignore the fact that I'd given him a large amount of money and hadn't seen anything real come out of it yet. One evening after my shift, I called him and tried to sound calm and careful. I told him I wasn't asking to interfere, but I wanted to see how things were going. Maybe some paperwork, receipts, anything official. I said it lightly, like it was just for my own peace of mind. The change in his tone was instant. He didn't yell or say anything cruel, but he got stiff and short. He said he was busy and didn't have everything organized into a binder yet. I told him I didn't need it to be perfect, just something to look at. That's when he said I needed to relax and trust the process. He reminded me that starting a business didn't happen overnight and that I had agreed to let him handle it his way. I tried again a week later, thinking maybe I had just caught him at a bad time before. I sent a simple text asking if he'd filed any permits yet or if he needed help with paperwork. He didn't answer for 2 days. When he finally replied, he said he was handling it and that the constant checking in made him feel like I thought he was irresponsible. That stopped me in my tracks, because the last thing I wanted was to push him away or make him feel judged. I backed off even though the unease stayed in my chest. I told myself that I had known him his whole life, and if he said he was doing the work, then maybe I just needed to be patient. I reminded myself that I wasn't his boss or his lender, I was his sister. But the more time passed, the less he brought it up on his own. He didn't mention meeting mechanics anymore. He didn't send pictures of tools or equipment. If I asked, he'd change the subject or say things were in progress or almost sorted. When I mentioned the amount again, not accusingly, just as a reminder, he told me I was getting stressed over something that was still unfolding. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was being too cautious because of everything I had been through recently. Maybe I was projecting my fear of losing control. Maybe I was expecting results too soon. I decided to give him more space and wait for him to come to me when something big happened. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't lining up. It wasn't one big red flag, just a slow spread of small ones I kept trying not to see. It was a Thursday, and I had just finished a 12-hour shift. My feet ached, my back hurt, and all I wanted was to take off my scrubs, heat something simple for dinner, and maybe sit in silence for a while. The sun was starting to go down when I pulled into the street. I wasn't thinking about Lucas or the business or the money. I was just tired. As I turned into my driveway, I hit the brakes without meaning to. Sitting there, gleaming like it came straight out of a commercial, was a midnight blue Ford F-150. It had black rims, tinted windows, and leather seats I could see even through the glass. It didn't look used. It didn't look discounted. It looked new, expensive new. For a few seconds, I didn't even get out of my car. My first thought was that I was in the wrong driveway. Then I saw Lucas step out from the side of the house. He was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. He didn't wait for me to ask anything. He walked toward the truck like he was presenting a trophy. I got out slowly, still wearing my badge and holding my keys. Before I could form a single question, he spread his arms and said, "Pretty sweet, right?" His voice was full of excitement, not shame, not hesitation. I stared at the truck again, trying to connect what I was seeing with the scraps of updates he'd been giving me. I asked him if it was his. He nodded like it was obvious. I asked if it was for the business. He said, "Of course. You can't show up to clients with some beat-up van. Image matters." He talked fast, almost rehearsed, listing reasons the truck was a smart move: durability, visibility, brand appeal, long-term investment. He opened the driver's side door to show off the interior. The seats were dark leather with stitching across the edges. The wheel had buttons and screens I didn't recognize. There was no sign it was something bought secondhand or on a tight budget. I didn't step closer. I didn't touch it. I just kept looking at the shine of the paint and thinking about the number he gave me months ago. A van, tools, permits, insurance, advertising. None of that matched what was in front of me. I asked if he had paperwork for it or if it was leased. He avoided that question and instead told me how he'd negotiated and how the dealership worked with him. He spoke like I should be excited too, like I should be proud. There was a strange, heavy feeling in my chest. Not anger yet, just confusion mixing with something colder. I told him I thought he was getting a work van. He brushed that off and said this was better, more professional, more marketable. He insisted clients would take him seriously if he pulled up in something clean and bold. I didn't respond right away. I was too stunned to argue. I remember the sound of a bird somewhere in the yard and the hum of the engine cooling. He kept talking, smiling like he'd just proven something. I stood there, silently realizing that whatever idea I had of how he used the money was slipping away fast, replaced by something I didn't want to name yet. I tried to stay calm and understand before reacting. I asked him directly if the truck was really part of the business plan he had talked about. He didn't seem bothered by the question at all. He just gave this short laugh, like I was overthinking everything, and said he needed something reliable and impressive if he was going to build a brand and make people take him seriously. He spoke like it was common sense. He said no one would trust a mechanic who showed up in an old van with faded paint. He told me the truck would help him stand out and attract better clients. The way he talked, it sounded like he had already justified every part of it in his mind before I even saw it. He didn't act guilty or nervous. He acted confident, like he'd made a smart move. But something still bothered me, and I couldn't ignore it. I asked who the truck was registered to. I didn't see any sign of it being tied to the business he claimed he was building. He didn't answer right away. He shrugged and said it was under his name, for now, because it was easier that way. He said once things were officially set up, he'd sort out the detail. I didn't like that answer. I asked more clearly, was the title under the business name or ours together, since I was the one who funded it? He looked annoyed that I was still questioning him. Finally, he said, "It's in my name. It has to be. You can't register something like this under a business that hasn't launched yet." He said it like I should have already known that, like I was the one being unreasonable for asking. I just stood there, looking at the truck again, and all I could think about was the money. The exact money he claimed he needed for a van, tools, permits, and insurance. Not a luxury pickup. I asked if any of the permits had been filed yet. He said he was working on it. I asked if he had receipts for the equipment he said he bought. He brushed it off and said everything was in motion, and I needed to just let him handle it. The more I tried to get clear answers, the more he acted like I was stressing over nothing. He said, "Why are you acting like I bought a sports car? This is for work," as if the price tag didn't matter. He reminded me that I told him I believed in him. He repeated that word, believed, like it was supposed to silence every concern I had. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him, but inside something shifted. It wasn't anger yet. It was more like a door quietly closing on the version of events I'd been holding on to. I didn't say much after that. I just told him I needed to understand exactly where things stood. He rolled his eyes and said everything was fine and I needed to stop worrying like a mom. That comment stung more than he knew. I didn't argue, but the moment he said it, I realized he still saw me as someone who would clean up after him, not someone he owed an explanation to. And for the first time since I gave him. After the truck incident, I stopped pretending everything was fine. I didn't yell or accuse him, but I stopped letting his vague answers slide. I began asking direct questions about paperwork, licenses, receipts, equipment, and any proof that something real existed behind his words. At first, he dodged, gave half answers, or acted offended that I didn't trust his process. But the more I stayed calm and firm, the more the cracks showed. One night I called him and told him I needed to see at least one permit or document with his name on it. He said the licensing office was still processing everything. I asked which office and the date he filed. He paused too long before answering, then tried to change the subject. That was when I knew I couldn't let it go. I stopped relying on what he said and started asking questions he couldn't twist. I asked which mechanic he was partnering with. He said the guy backed out. I asked about the equipment he supposedly bought. He said it was in storage, but when I asked where, he couldn't remember the address. I asked about insurance, and he claimed it was bundled into something else, which made no sense. The turning point came when I told him I wanted to see the remaining balance of the money I'd given him. I asked directly how much was left. He got defensive right away. He said I was micromanaging and killing the momentum. I didn't argue. I just asked again. That's when he snapped and said, "There isn't a lot sitting around, okay?" Those words did more than any excuse he'd given before. I stayed quiet and let him talk, and that was what finally forced the truth out piece by piece. He hadn't filed any licenses. He hadn't talked to anyone official. He hadn't hired anyone or set up anything legally. I asked him where the money went. He said the truck took a good chunk. I asked how much exactly, and he brushed it off like numbers didn't matter. Then I brought up the equipment again, and he finally admitted he hadn't bought most of what he claimed. He said he was planning to once things were lined up. I didn't say a word. I just waited. That silence made him nervous, and he started filling it with things he thought would soften the blow. That's how I learned about the trip to Miami. He tried to call it a business opportunity, and said he met people who might invest later. He mentioned his girlfriend went with him, and when I asked if she was part of the business too, he didn't answer. Then he mentioned networking weekends in passing. I asked what that meant. He said he met people at events, but when I pressed for names, he got irritated and said they were social environments where connections happen. I knew then those were just parties, loud gatherings, bars, maybe hotels, all paid for with the money I'd given him. By the time he ran out of excuses, most of the money was gone. No permits, no structure, no real plan, just a truck in his name, a vacation, and a handful of nights out disguised as building relationships. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just listened until there was nothing else for him to hide. And that was the moment when something in me stopped trying to protect him and started waking up to what he'd really done. The money, I started wondering how long he'd been counting on that. Hannah didn't react right away. She kept her voice calm and acted as if she was just trying to understand what went wrong. She knew if she confronted him too soon, he might hide evidence or twist the story. So she told Lucas she just needed some time to think and that they would talk later about how to move forward. Meanwhile, she started saving every voicemail, screenshotting every text, and printing her bank statements that showed the exact transfer to him. She kept everything in a folder in her work locker where he couldn't find it. She also spoke with a lawyer recommended by a coworker. The attorney listened carefully, asked for details, and told her she had a strong case since the money was given with a clear purpose. They discussed how to prove intent and misuse of funds, and the lawyer explained the steps they would take to recover what she could. It wasn't just about the money anymore. For Hannah, it was about betrayal from someone she trusted more than anyone. She didn't tell Lucas she had met a lawyer. She acted normal around him, even asked how things were going with the business, so he wouldn't suspect anything. At home, she opened a new savings account so none of her future money would be at risk. She also changed the password on her email and phone, knowing Lucas sometimes used her devices without asking. She contacted the bank to request old statements and made copies to give to her attorney. When Lucas bragged to family members about how close he was to launching the business, she only listened and stayed quiet. She didn't correct him or reveal what she had learned. Her attorney suggested gathering proof of his purchases, so Hannah looked up the truck's registration and printed the listing from when it was sold. She also found photos on his public social media from Miami and sent them to her lawyer. Every night after Lily went to bed, Hannah would sit at the kitchen table and sort through documents, highlighting dates and writing notes so nothing would get mixed up. She was tired, but the anger kept her focused. She remembered every promise Lucas had made when he asked for the money. She remembered how he said she would never regret helping him. Those words helped her stay steady instead of breaking down. By the time her lawyer said they were ready to move forward, she had a complete file, organized, dated, and ready to use. She didn't warn Lucas or hint at anything. Hannah moved forward with the case exactly as her attorney advised. The paperwork was filed quietly, and Lucas didn't realize what was happening until he received the notice. When the truck's registration was frozen, he stormed into her driveway demanding answers, but she didn't argue with him. She simply told him everything would be handled through the court. He tried to act confident at first, saying she couldn't take what was his. But once the judge reviewed the transfers, the messages, and his lack of licenses or business records, things shifted fast. The court saw that the money was given under the agreement of starting a shared business, and since he used it for personal gain, he was responsible for paying it back. The court ordered the Ford F-150 to be sold. Lucas protested, saying he needed it for work, but he had no proof of a working business to support that claim. The attorney handling the case made it clear that the vehicle was purchased using funds that did not belong to him alone. Once the truck was listed and sold, the proceeds went straight toward paying Hannah back. His bank accounts were also flagged, preventing him from moving or hiding what little was left. He had no explanation for the vacation, the parties, or the money he claimed was invested. Every lie he had told came back around in paperwork, screenshots, and his own words. His girlfriend disappeared the moment things got serious, and the friends he partied with stopped answering his calls. Hannah didn't brag or gloat. She showed up when needed, answered questions, and let the evidence speak for her. She stayed focused on recovering what she could so she could rebuild her future and protect Lily. In the end, she got back most of her savings. It wasn't the exact amount she had given, but it was enough to move forward without starting over from nothing. Lucas was left to deal with the consequences alone. His credit took a hit, his accounts were monitored, and his reputation with family and friends was damaged. People who once believed his stories started keeping their distance. He tried shifting blame onto Hannah, but no one was interested in his excuses anymore. Hannah didn't make room for bitterness. She put the recovered money back into her savings account and focused on her plans, her daughter, her work, and the home she still wanted to buy. She didn't speak badly about Lucas to others, but she no longer stepped in to rescue him or protect his image. For the first time, Lucas had to deal with a problem he created without someone else cleaning it up. He had always counted on charm and excuses to get him out of trouble, but this time there was no way around it. The court decision stood, and the damage was his to live with. Hannah closed the door on that chapter without drama. She didn't need an apology or explanation. Getting back what was hers and walking away with her dignity was. Lucas finally learned that using someone's trust has a cost, and this time, he was the one paying it. Wanted the truth to come out in a way he couldn't spin or escape.